From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We felt compelled to assure that we will not tolerate discrimination on the basis of national origin or religion, because that truly goes against the very essence of what makes Hawaii a very special place.
Judges in Hawaii and Maryland block President Trump's revised travel ban targeting visitors from 6 majority Muslim nations. The Hawaii ruling came just hours before the ban was to go into effect. We'll speak with the ACLU about the travel ban and why border agents are increasingly searching the cell phones of visitors and even U.S. citizens. Then we go to Capitol Hill to speak with Democratic Congress member Luis Gutierrez, who was arrested by ICE after refusing to leave a meeting with immigration and customs enforcement officials. Plus, we look at a stunning new United Nations report that calls Israel an apartheid regime.
This report's results are based on a scholarly inquiry and overwhelming evidence that Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid towards the Palestinian people.
We'll speak with the report's co-author, Richard Falk, the former UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian human rights. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On Wednesday, only hours before the Trump administration's new travel ban was set to go into effect, a federal judge in Hawaii issued a nationwide halt to the executive order, which would have temporarily suspended refugees and people from 6 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States. This morning, a federal judge in Maryland also blocked part of the travel ban, dealing a second legal blow to the Trump executive order. On Wednesday, Hawaii Attorney General Doug Chin celebrated the ruling by Hawaiian federal judge Derek Watson.
That's a big reason why Hawaii brought this case, is because it's really something that hits us to the core. If you have an order that's coming out there that's taking us back half a century to a time when there was discrimination by nations of origin or by religion, that's something that we have to speak up against.
This is now the second time President Trump's executive orders banning refugees and travelers from majority Muslim countries have been blocked by the courts. On Wednesday, President Trump criticized the ruling in Hawaii.
This ruling makes us look weak, which, by the way, we no longer are, believe me. Just look at our borders. We're going to fight this terrible ruling. We're going to take our case as far as it needs to go, including all the way up to the Supreme Court.
We'll have more on Trump's blocked travel ban after headlines. President Trump is set to send his proposed budget to Congress today. The budget calls for an unprecedented $54 billion increase in military spending, as well as a $2.8 billion increase in funding for Homeland Security, largely to pay for Trump's expanded border wall and the hiring of 1,500 new Border Patrol and ICE agents. The budget slashes funding for the Environmental Protection Agency by 31%, funding for the State Department by 28%. It also proposes cutting billions in funding for the Department of Housing and Urban Development and Health and Human Services. The Education Department would see $9 billion cut from its budget, even as so-called school choice programs would receive $1.4 billion more in funding. Trump's Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has been a major backer of such programs, which include vouchers for private and religious schools that divert public funding out of the public school system. Trump's budget also proposes entirely eliminating funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which supports public radio and television stations nationwide, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Legal Services Corporation, which funds free legal and aid nationwide. The proposed budget is expected to face fierce opposition in Congress. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, House Speaker Paul Ryan admitted the Republican plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act will have to be changed if it's to pass the House. The plan has been losing support since the Congressional Budget Office released a report Monday saying 24 million Americans will lose their insurance under the plan within 10 years. On Capitol Hill Wednesday, top Republicans rejected President Trump's unsubstantiated claims that President Obama ordered the wiretapping of Trump's phones during the 2016 presidential campaign. House Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes said he does not think Obama tapped Trump's phones. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said he's not provided any evidence to Trump that would substantiate the president's claims. Senate Judiciary Chair Charles Grassley and South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, both Republicans, both threatened to block Trump's nomination of Rod Rosenstein for Deputy Attorney General unless the FBI answers lawmakers' questions about the wiretap claims. President Trump spent part of Wednesday in Nashville, Tennessee, where he honored former President Andrew Jackson, laying a wreath at Jackson's tomb site and comparing himself to the former president during a visit to Jackson's plantation, the Hermitage. President Jackson was a slaveholder who also signed the order to forcibly remove 16,000 Native Americans from their lands in what became known as the Trail of Tears. Trump's words and visit drew condemnation from many, including members of the Cherokee Nation, who called Jackson a, quote, destructive man to not just Cherokee people, but Native people in general, unquote. The Senate has voted to approve the confirmation of former Indiana Senator Dan Coats as Director of National Intelligence. In 2003, Coats served as U.S. Ambassador to Germany, where he pressured the German government not to oppose President George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq. He's also a vocal enemy of Planned Parenthood, saying in 2015 the barbaric practices of Planned Parenthood should not receive a dime of taxpayer money. Meanwhile, former Goldman Sachs executive Dina Powell has been promoted to Deputy National Security Advisor. She's one of more than a half-dozen people tied to Goldman Sachs who've been tapped for top positions in Trump's administration. Reporters are expressing outrage over the State Department's decision to allow only one reporter to travel with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on his trip to Asia. The only reporter who is allowed to travel with Tillerson is Erin McPike of the conservative news outlet The Independent Journal Review, which was founded by two Republican political consultants. McPike has only been working for the outlet for a few weeks. She doesn't typically even cover the State Department. The Justice Department has announced the indictments of 2 Russian spies and 2 hackers over the 2014 hacking of 500 million Yahoo accounts. It's the first time U.S. criminal cyber charges have been brought against Russian officials. In the Netherlands, Prime Minister Mark Rutte fought off a challenge from the xenophobic far-right-wing politician Geert Wilders in a closely watched election Wednesday. Dutch voters turned out in record numbers, showing Rutte's party far more support than expected by pundits. With 95% of the votes counted, Rutte's center-right People's Party for Freedom and Democracy has won 33 parliament seats. Wilders' anti-immigrant, anti-European Union Party for Freedom, whose slogan was "Make the Netherlands ours again," won only 20 parliament seats. This is Prime Minister Mark Rutte.
This is also a night when the Netherlands, after Brexit, after the American elections, has said stop to the wrong kind of populism.
The Dutch left party, Green Left, also won big in Wednesday's elections, increasing its seats in parliament from 4 to 14. The party's headed by 30-year-old Jesse Klaver, whose father is Moroccan and mother of Indonesian descent. After the election, Klaver said, quote, "To all my left-wing friends in Europe, don't try to fake the populace. Be pro-refugee. Be pro-European. We're gaining momentum in the polls, and I think that's the message we have to send to Europe. You can stop populism," he said. In more news on European elections, France's right-wing presidential candidate François Fillon has been charged with multiple counts of embezzlement over allegations he gave his wife and 2 of his children fake jobs as parliamentary aides. He's currently polling 3rd in the race behind the far right-wing candidate Marine Le Pen and former economy minister Emmanuel Macron. Meanwhile, France's left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who has been compared to Bernie Sanders, says he's received the 500 endorsements from elected officials required to run in the first round of France's presidential elections on April 23rd. A United Nations agency has published a report accusing Israel of imposing an apartheid regime of racial discrimination on the Palestinian people. The report was commissioned and published by the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, which is comprised of 18 Arab states. This is the head of the UN agency, Rima Khalaf.
The importance of this report is not only because it is the first of its kind, one that is published by one of the United Nations bodies that clearly and frankly concludes that Israel is a racist state, that has established an apartheid system, that persecutes the Palestinian people, but also it sheds light on the essence of the Palestinian cause and the conditions needed for accomplishing peace.
In response, Israel's UN ambassador, Danny Danon, said, quote, "The attempt to smear and falsely label the only true democracy in the Middle East by creating a false analogy is despicable and constitutes a blatant lie," unquote. Meanwhile, the Palestinian novelist Khalida Gosha has been released after Israeli forces raided her home in East Jerusalem and subjected her to hours of detention and questioning on Saturday. The acclaimed novelist says the questioning centered on her upcoming novel, The Jackal's Trap, which deals with Palestinian informants working for the Israeli government in the Israeli-occupied territories. She's been released on bail and is awaiting unspecified future charges. We'll have more on Israel and Palestine later in the broadcast. Cambodia's prime minister says he'll resist a demand by the U.S. government that Cambodia repay a 50-year-old loan to a government that came to power through a U.S.-backed coup. Prime Minister Hun Sen said this month the U.S. is pressuring the International Monetary Fund to withhold loans to Cambodia unless it repays approximately $500 million in U.S. loans paid to the Lon Nol dictatorship, which used the money to buy weapons it used to kill its own citizens. The loans came as the U.S. government dropped 500,000 tons of explosives on Cambodia as part of President Richard Nixon's escalation of the Vietnam War. In Syria, more than 30 people were killed in 2 suicide bomb attacks in the capital Damascus Wednesday. More than 100 people were also injured in the attacks on the Palace of Justice and a local restaurant. No group claimed responsibility for the bombings. This comes as the Washington Post, citing unnamed U.S. officials, is reporting the Pentagon is considering deploying up to 1,000 more U.S. troops to northern Syria in the coming weeks. In breaking news from France, at least one person has been injured in an explosion after opening an envelope at the headquarters of the International Monetary Fund in Paris this morning. Back in the United States, the Texas Senate passed an anti-LGBT bathroom bill on Tuesday, which would prohibit transgender people from using public bathrooms that match their gender identity. The legislation, SB 6, is similar to North Carolina's HB 2 bathroom bill, which has caused widespread protests and boycotts of the state. The Texas bill now heads to the state House of Representatives. And the San Francisco Board of Supervisors has unanimously voted for legislation aimed at divesting up to $1.2 billion from banks financing the contested $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline. Other U.S. cities, including Seattle, Alameda, Santa Monica, and Davis, California, and Native American nations, including the Muckleshoot Tribe in Seattle and the Nez Perce Tribe in Idaho, and the Mi'kmaq Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota have approved similar divestment legislation. A $70 billion pension fund owned by Norway's public sector employee unions has also announced it'll divest from its shares in the Dakota Access-linked companies, Energy Transfer Partners, Phillips 66, Enbridge, and Marathon, citing, quote, an unacceptable risk of contributing to serious or systemic human rights violations, unquote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Narmeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Just hours before the Trump administration's new travel ban was set to go into effect, a federal judge in Hawaii issued a nationwide halt to the order. And then this morning, a judge in Maryland also temporarily blocked the travel ban, which would have suspended entry to all refugees and blocked entry to visitors from 6 majority Muslim nations: Iran, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and Libya. This is now the second time President Trump's executive orders banning refugees and travelers from majority Muslim countries have been blocked by the courts. U.S. District Judge Derek Watson in Hawaii said evidence exists to show, quote, the executive order was issued with a purpose to disfavor a particular religion.
In his ruling, Judge Watson also said there was nothing secret about the motive of Trump's executive order, citing comments Trump made, as well as those of White House aide Stephen Miller and former New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who said Trump originally called it a Muslim ban. Speaking in Memphis Wednesday, Trump criticized the judge's ruling.
This ruling makes us look weak, which, by the way, we no longer are, believe me. Just look at our borders. We're going to fight this terrible ruling. We're going to take our case as far as it needs to go, including all the way up to the Supreme Court.
That was Trump speaking in Nashville. Last week, Hawaii became the first state to sue Trump over the travel ban. On Wednesday, Hawaiian Governor David Ige praised the court ruling.
We felt compelled to assure that we will not tolerate discrimination on the basis of national origin or religion, because that truly goes against the very essence of what makes Hawaii a very special place. And so certainly we felt compelled to file the lawsuit and are very happy that the court agreed with our position.
Well, we're joined right now by Lee Gallant, the ACLU attorney who presented the first challenge to Trump's initial travel ban last month. The ACLU brought the case against the revised ban in Maryland. Lee Gallant, welcome back to Democracy Now!
Thanks so much for having me.
So talk about these two stays of the ban, first Hawaii and now in Maryland.
Yeah, I mean, we're extremely pleased, but I think we're not surprised because there is so much evidence out there that the primary purpose of this was religious discrimination. And I think the judges rightly saw that, and they saw that a few tweaks here or there would not eliminate, that what they said is this doesn't eliminate religious discrimination, because to a reasonable observer, it's clear what the president was trying to do. And the courts have said don't psychoanalyze government officials. Well, there's no need to psychoanalyze here. The president stated we want a Muslim ban, and that's what happens when you say we want religious discrimination. The courts push back.
But how common is it to look at statements made in the past? I mean, the judge said, we played part of his words, that these plainly worded statements betray the executive order's stated secular purpose. So is it unusual for courts to reference statements made in the past to infer in the present that the intent is the same?
It's not unusual, and the Supreme Court has made clear you need to look at full context, and you can't just avoid judicial scrutiny by cleaning up an order. You can look at statements. What I think is unusual is that the President of the United States made these kind of discriminatory statements, that there was so much evidence and so much direct evidence. I mean, normally, most government officials will try and hide it a little.
Let's go back to Donald Trump last night speaking in Nashville.
A judge has just blocked our executive order on travel and refugees coming into our country from certain countries. The order he blocked was a watered-down version of the first order that was also blocked by another judge and should have never been blocked to start with. This is, in the opinion of many, an unprecedented judicial overreach. The law and the Constitution give the president the power to suspend immigration when he deems, or she, fortunately it will not be Hillary she,
That was Donald Trump speaking last night in Nashville, Tennessee. Lee Gallant, your response?
Well, you know, what he said was this is a watered-down version. I mean, he's admitting again we're trying to do the same thing. And so I think, that's telling. He's not backing off the fact that they are trying to have a Muslim ban. And I think the courts are recognizing that.
Well, what is the difference between the first and the second travel ban?
Right. So the second ban does a few things. It eliminates Iraq from the countries that are banned. It also takes out a preference for minority religions, which the court said that's so overtly discriminatory between religions. It takes out lawful permanent residents and some visa holders. So it cures certain problems. But I mean, we're pleased that the president retreated to that extent. I mean, that's a victory unto itself. But what it doesn't do is eliminate the religious discrimination. It doesn't eliminate the primary purpose being to ban Muslims.
But what about what Trump said, though, at the end of his statement, namely that the president does have the authority to issue an executive order to suspend immigration?
So I want to be as clear as possible that the president has enormous authority in the area of immigration and does get deference, but what he cannot do is discriminate on the basis of religion. So if there's a genuine national security threat raised by particular individuals, of course they can investigate. What they can't, they need to investigate particular threats to particular individuals. What they can't do is base it on groups or religion. Assume a particular religion is a threat.
In his ruling, U.S. District Court Judge Derek Watson cited an appearance by White House senior policy advisor Stephen Miller on Fox News talking about the new revised ban.
Fundamentally, you're still going to have the same basic policy outcome for the country, but you're going to be responsive to a lot of very technical issues that were brought up by the court, and those will be addressed. But in terms of protecting the country, those basic policies are still going to be in effect.
Your response, Lee.
Well, right. So he's saying the basic policies are going to still be in effect, and the courts are rightly calling him on it. He's saying we're going to try and do the same thing, but we're going to weave around to see if we can get around what the courts have thought was Muslim discrimination. But the courts called him on it.
So what's the difference between the Maryland and the Hawaii stays?
Right, so that's a good question. So what the Maryland judge said is, I don't think there's enough evidence in the record to ban the refugee, to block the refugee part, but the six-country ban, which is the critical part, he did block. The Hawaii went further and said, I'm going to block even the refugee part. But I think the critical thing about Maryland that's different than Hawaii is it's a longer injunction. It's what's called a preliminary injunction. It will last through trial. The Hawaii judge only issued a short injunction that will expire in a few weeks.
Well, the Trump administration may still get its way here, right? Because an appeals court may decide that the Honolulu judge made a mistake in its assessment, or the Supreme Court could intervene. What do you see as the prospects?
We're not under any illusions that the litigation is over. I think the government has made it clear that they intend to appeal. We're anticipating a long, hard legal battle, but we're hopefully going to prevail at the end.
So let's talk about what happens when this is appealed. What Hawaii is Ninth Circuit, that same Ninth Circuit that reviewed the first Washington state stay on the ban. This could go to the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
And this could go to a Supreme Court that has a confirmed Judge Gorsuch as the ninth member.
Right. It'll depend on the timing, but absolutely. You know, it's hard to predict where it'll end up, when it'll end up in the Supreme Court, if it will, or what the court will do. We're hopeful that we will prevail if it does go to the Supreme Court, but we're a long way from there because we will have appeals court rulings, not just by the Ninth Circuit, but it's potentially have a Fourth Circuit ruling as well out of the Maryland case. That's the circuit that covers Maryland.
We're also joined by Congressman Luis Gutierrez from Chicago. He's in Washington, D.C. right now. I hope that you no longer have handcuffs on, but we'll talk about that in a minute, Congressman Gutierrez. ICE handcuffed you the other day for your for staying in their office. But we want to ask you about the travel ban, your thoughts on these two stays out of Hawaii and Maryland.
Well, it's a victory for people. It's a victory for democracy. I guess if you run a campaign and you on repeated occasions say you're going to discriminate against a population of people, you're going to have a Muslim ban, and then you initiate executive orders, people are going to remember. Apparently, judges read the papers, listen to the news, and remember. And that's all they really had to do yesterday, because even Stephen Miller reiterated after the first lawsuit. These are just some small technical differences that we're going to make. And then we have, of course, our all-star Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who said, don't worry, I advised him how to get a Muslim ban without it seeming like a Muslim ban or being able to pass on judicial muster. Look, they're human beings too. They receive the news, they get the information, and apparently the judge remembered.
Well, we're going to ask you to stay with us after break. Congressman Luis Gutierrez and Lee Glaron, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
The lawyer with the ACLU, who was the lawyer who brought the original lawsuit against the original ban in a Brooklyn court. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Stay with us. Four Walls by Harsh Crowd here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
In Chicago, federal police handcuffed Democratic Congress member Luis Gutierrez, along with activists and lawyers, Monday after they held a sit-in protest at a federal immigration office. Gutierrez says the group refused to leave the Chicago Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, after the agency's regional director refused to answer his questions about the Trump administration's plans for immigration sweeps and mass deportation. Gutierrez spoke out on Monday after he was handcuffed.
We've accomplished our goal today. We stood up to the Department of Homeland Security and to Donald Trump's hatred, bigotry today against refugees, against Muslims, against our immigrant community. And we stood up and said, your policies are morally bankrupt.
Monday's meeting was Gutierrez's first with ICE officials since President Trump's inauguration. Last month, Congressman Gutierrez and fellow Congressional Hispanic Caucus member Norma Torres of California said Republican lawmakers had them thrown out of a meeting with a top ICE official. For more, we are staying with Congressmember Luis Gutierrez, who's now back in Washington, D.C. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee and is co-chair of the Immigration Task Force of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congressman Gutierrez, describe what happened on Monday.
Well, we had a meeting with ICE officials, as you reported. There were many community organizations, legal defense funds there. A group of us insisted that we receive answers to specific questions. Much has been reported on the case of Francisca Lino. She's a Mexican national. For 12 years, she has reported dutifully to ICE and to Homeland Security, and each year they said, come back next year. She is a mother of 4 American citizens and an American citizen husband. And they have been showing discretion in terms of their enforcement action towards her until this last meeting. And they won't reverse their decision. We asked them, we demanded, they reversed that decision. They keep saying to us in a very, in this contradiction of terms, they keep saying to the American public, we're going after the criminals, we're going after the bad people, the people that are out there to do harm. Well, they're not. Francisca Lino, she's a mom. And she's reported for 12 consecutive years. What changed? The only thing that changed was that Donald Trump got sworn in as president of the United States, and you have Bannon and Miller, and you have the new Attorney General of the United States, Sessions, who have all been talking. They didn't all come together during this administration. They have been cooperating with one another for many years, waiting to institute this kind of xenophobic, anti-immigrant policies. Second, I think this is very, very crucial. Last Friday, through a series of tweets, imagine, the Department of Homeland Security, through a series of tweets, said, oh, those dreamers, those that have got DACA, we've picked up 1,500 of them. They're criminals and gangbangers. And then they went on to say in another tweet, oh, we're going to go after them if they violate the law. DACA doesn't give them protection against being criminals. Again, 750,000 wonderful young people. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're nurses, they're school teachers in the Chicago public school system. They're workers, they're students, criminalizing them once again and saying they no longer have the protection against deportation. I thought it was important that we ask a fundamental question. Are you going after DACA recipients? Because we know you've done it in Washington State, we know you've done it in Mississippi, and we have other cases in which you have done it. So, look, somebody's got to stand up. If I tell people it's right to give your government information, just give your information over to the government, go through a background check, that you're going to be right with the law, and you are right with the law, and you have done absolutely nothing wrong other than another president got elected, you got to stand up for those people that have stood up for themselves. That's what we were doing that day. And we said to them, until we have answers, we will not lead. Look, it shows you what happens with a system which is run by bullies. And what did they do? They handcuffed us, and as soon as they handcuffed us and they saw that we didn't have any fear, they released us. I've never seen such a situation before. But the most important thing is we raise the issue to the American public. And we're going to continue to do that. And I'm really excited about the fact that come this May 1st, across this country, we're going to fill dozens of cities in an International Day of Workers in which immigrants are going to be the primary showcase of American workers.
Well, I want to ask you about Army veteran Miguel Perez Jr., a Mexican-born legal permanent resident of the U.S., an Army veteran who served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. He arrived in the U.S. at the age of 8 and now faces deportation. This is his father, Miguel Perez Sr., speaking through a translator to the Chicago Tribune.
Él estaba en grupo de fuerzas especiales en el Army.
He was in special forces in the Army.
Y a él lo enviaron a Afganistán.
And they sent him to Afghanistan.
So
he was there from 2001 to 2003 in the first one. He came really proud, very happy.
Yo también me sentí orgulloso.
And I was very proud of him as well, because he defended the Constitution, he defended the system, defended this land, defended the flag.
Y como dice mi hijo, yo estuve en la línea.
And like my son says, I was there, I was confronting there, I was in front of the battle.
Ahora merece una nueva oportunidad.
I deserve an opportunity.
No le vemos por qué tiene que ser deportado.
I don't know why I have to be deported.
So that was Miguel Perez Sr., the father of Miguel Perez. Now, he is a legal permanent resident of the U.S. Yes. How is it possible to deport him?
Well, because the Trump administration can and will. And he is under an order of deportation. He has recently lost his case. And I think I'm so happy you're highlighting. He's not the only veteran. There are literally hundreds of veterans that have served in the armed forces of the United States. And like Mr. Perez, are decorated veterans. Mr. Perez has never been a U.S. citizen. He's a legal permanent resident, a green card holder. His mom's a citizen. His dad's a citizen. All of his family are citizens with his exception. Under the Bush administration, he was supposed to be facilitated the process of American citizenship when he joined the armed forces. That did not happen. But he went on to serve not 1 tour of duty, but 2. And I find it just so reprehensible that an administration led by a president of the United States that on multiple occasions refused to bear arms for this nation when he was called upon, said he had a bone spur that hasn't stopped him from playing on every golf course in every continent of the world, would deport someone who did take up arms and wasn't even a citizen of the United States, not 1 tour, but 2 tours. So look, we're going to continue to fight for Mr. Perez. We are asking senators to look at this case and to file a private bill. And what is that? A private bill is when a senator says, here's my bill because of these extraordinary circumstances. I want to file this bill to make this individual a citizen of the United States, because that seems to be the one road. And you're going to be hearing, Amy, more and more about them. They are along the border by the hundreds, destitute. Now, I want the American public to know one thing. Mr. Perez gets to come back after he's deported. You know when he gets to come back? When he's dead. He gets to come back in a coffin and buried in a military cemetery for his service to this country. But while he's alive, he cannot live here.
Well, Representative Gutierrez, could you explain what the argument is that the Trump administration is using to justify his deportation?
Well, that he committed a crime. And he did. He was convicted of a felony. And look, I think you need to take everything into account. Yes, he's suffering greatly from PTSD. He has wounds, head wounds, that have caused him great debilitation. That's going to have an impact. That has an impact on a lot of our men and women who return and have a great difficulty. But look, you have to take that and balance that out with what? With the fact that this is the only country that he knows. They should have facilitated his American citizenship, because had he been an American citizen, he would have simply been gone to trial, paid his time, and then be reintegrated into society. We think this is an exceptional case in which the government should, and just so that we're clear, I called the prosecutors and I said, this begs for you to show discretion. You do not have to deport Mr. Perez. You can show discretion and withdraw the charges. He's already paid he went to jail for 5 years. The sentence of the judge, he fulfilled it completely. Don't add an additional, how would I say, burden to this man. Let him reintegrate. Well, he needs his family more than ever before. But we have hundreds of veterans like this that are on the other side of the border who have served in the armed forces of the United States faithfully and dutifully.
Last month, President Trump called his deportation plans a military operation during his meeting with CEOs.
You see what's happening at the border. All of a sudden, for the first time, we're getting gang members out. We're getting drug lords out. We're getting really bad dudes out of this country, and at a rate that nobody's ever seen before. And they're the bad ones. And it's a military operation because what has been allowed to come into our country, when you see gang violence that you've read about like never before, and all of the things, much of that is people that are here illegally. And they're rough and they're tough, but they're not tough like our people. So we're getting them out.
If you could respond to that, Congressman Gutierrez, what he's saying. Also, the fact that the budget's just been released and, massively upping the Pentagon budget, Homeland Security budget, including paying for the wall that President Trump said he would never do.
Sure. Look, again, what they're doing is this new act of criminalizing all immigrants, right? So every time, and they only talk about one border. They don't talk about the border at JFK or the one at LAX or Miami or the one in O'Hare, where literally hundreds of thousands of immigrants come on a monthly basis and millions of immigrants that have overstayed their visa arrived in the United States. They want to focus on brown people. They want to focus on that border with Mexico. And they want to make it appear that you have everything to fear from these bad hombres because the criminal cartel that impacts your life is only the one that comes to that border. Nonsense. Look, the fact is that border entries through the border are at a record low and continuing to be reduced. You know who's showing up at that border? Refugees. Yes, refugees from Guatemala, from El Salvador, that are coming from Honduras. Why? Because there are criminal cartels that are there. And let me just suggest to the American public this. Those criminal cartels are there because of the insatiable demand that exists in the United States for the drugs that they run into the United States. Number one, it's American dollars, it's American guns that are using and fortifying those cartels.
Well, I want to turn to another issue. Iowa Republican Congressmember Steve King sparked outrage Sunday after publishing a racist tweet in support of far-right Dutch politician Geert Wilders. Representative King was retweeting a cartoon by the anti-immigrant group Voice of Europe, depicting Wilders with a finger plugging a leak in a dike labeled Western civilization, holding back a toxic wave of Islam. The cartoon also depicts Muslim men with a sword and a suicide bomb vest. Representative King's retweet of the cartoon read, quote, "Wilders understands that culture and demographics are our destiny. We can't restore our civilization with somebody else's babies," end quote. So, Representative Gutierrez, could you respond to that?
Number one, let's understand something. I was born in the United States of America in 1953. I wasn't born equal to everyone else because separate but equal was still the law of the land when I was born here. I think he wants to go back to those times. It's really about the color of your skin, right? It's really about your country of origin. That's really he feels that we are all an attack on civilization because of who we are. Look, I'm as American as Mr. King is. My grandson, Luis Andres, if you asked him, he's 13 years old. He's going to graduate from 8th grade, and he'll tell you, I feel real Puerto Rican in this arm, Grandpa, real Mexican in this one because his dad's from Mexico, but I'm 100% American right here in my heart. That's what he needs to understand, and that we all are Americans, regardless of the color of our skins or our countries of origin, and that is the tradition of America. They keep talking about this question about assimilation. Well, do I sound assimilated to you? Does it seem like I had a problem growing up in my house in which my parents didn't encourage and instill in me the necessity to learn English? It's foolishness. It's just complete idiocy. The United States of America is the largest cemetery in the world of foreign languages. It's where the Germans buried their language, the Poles buried their language, where people come and integrate into American society and adopt English. What is wrong with people continuing to speak a second or even a third language? In most industrialized nations, that is a sign that you're a smart person and an educated person. We should continue to do that in the United States
Congressman
of America
Luis
also.
Gutierrez, I want to thank you for being with us. Democrat of Illinois, member of the Judiciary Committee, co-chair of the Immigration Task Force of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, just recently handcuffed by ICE as he refused to leave the office until he got some answers on what the Trump administration's policy on immigration and deportation is. As we turn right now to look at another change at our nation's borders, border agents are increasingly seizing cell phones and demanding passwords of travelers, including U.S. citizens. The number of searches skyrocketed under President Obama, reaching 25,000 last year. But the number is expected to be far higher this year. According to NBC News, more than 5,000 devices were searched in February alone. That's more than the entire number searched in all of 2015.
Well, joining us now is Aisha Bandari, staff attorney, ACLU Speech, Privacy and Technology Project. She recently wrote an article titled, "Can Border Agents Search Your Electronic Devices? It's Complicated." Welcome, Aisha. So could you explain why is it complicated? What exactly can border agents do?
Sure. Thank you very much. This is an area where Customs and Border Protection has policies and asserts wide authority to search and seize devices at the border, and where courts have not really had the opportunity to fully test the limits of that authority. The legal question is unsettled. At the moment, CBP does claim the authority to search devices without any individualized suspicion, essentially for no reason tied to that individual at all, and potentially to seize the device, keep your smartphone for days or weeks on end, and at that stage has the ability to forensically search the device, again, without a warrant, without probable cause. And a forensic search is very invasive. It means they can gather not only the metadata on your device, all of the files, but even files you have deleted. So this obviously has huge privacy impacts, not only for travelers and immigrants to the United States, but every citizen who crosses our borders.
But how different is this from what was happening under the Obama administration?
Well, it's very interesting that the last year of the Obama administration saw a 5-fold increase in device searches. In 2015, there were around 4,000, 5,000 device searches. In 2016, nearly 24,000 device searches. And we haven't gotten any clear answers on why. Has there been a shift in policy? What's the reason that CBP is doing this at an ever greater number? Now, what's interesting is some of the courts who have looked at this and who haven't required a higher standard under the Fourth Amendment for a search have said one of the practical protections is that CBP doesn't have time to search everyone's devices and to go through all of their emails and their files. But obviously the huge increase that we saw in 2016 calls that into question, because device searches can be very quick.
What are your rights? If they say, I want your passport, do you have to give it to your password? Do you have to give it to them?
Your rights depend very much on your immigration status, which I know is not a comforting response. But for citizens, citizens can certainly refuse to give their password. They have a right to re-enter the country. If they do, they face the risk that they will be detained for longer, maybe up to several hours, and that their device is seized, and they may not see it for days or weeks. So that's a decision that everyone, any U.S. citizen at the border has to take. Would they rather hand over their password, or would they rather refuse and face the risk that they lose their device?
What about cloud data?
Well, with cloud data, I think the justification is even more attenuated from the sort of customs and immigration the justification that CBP gives, because cloud data isn't in any meaningful sense being transported across the border. There's no importation of contraband, right? It's just that your device connects to the internet and you can connect to your social media account. So this is untested by the courts, but I really hope that the courts will see that demanding passwords to cloud data has no connection to customs and immigration at all. And it's just an end run around domestic protections that require law enforcement to go through certain steps before they can get the contents of your emails or your cloud data.
And have you found it's religious or racial profiling? Who is getting their phones taken, though it's a massive number?
Well, we've certainly seen anecdotal accounts that it seems to be targeted on the basis of religion. We've heard a lot about Muslim Americans having their devices searched. But unfortunately, without further detail on why these 24,000 devices were searched and who was searched, what nationality they had, it's hard to know what the systematic issue is. And hopefully there will be more transparency about that.
Well, Aisha Bandari, I want to thank you for being with us, staff attorney for the ACLU Speech, Privacy and Technology Project. We will link to your article, Can Border Agents Search Your Electronic Devices? It's complicated. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, we head to The Hague. Stay with us.
It's the birth of a child, hidden from us all, hiding from the only northern star, and to protect us all from serving out the wrong guys. Here comes a child made of gold, traveled from the 7 seas. Holy Savior, arriving from a mother's womb. Shallow waters we wander with the dialect of faith. We face the many faces that our prison holds. Crystals from our youth, carved out from our bones, minerals from our reels, boys from our bleeding sides, torn to be complete.
Ila Bamba here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
For the first time, a United Nations agency has directly accused Israel of imposing an apartheid regime on the Palestinian people. The report also urges governments to, quote, support boycott, divestment and sanctions activities and respond positively to calls for such initiatives. The findings come in a new report published by the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, which is comprised of 18 Arab states. This is the head of the UN agency, Rima Khalaf.
The importance of this report is not only because it is the first of its kind, one that is published by one of the United Nations bodies that clearly and frankly concludes that Israel is a racist state that has established an apartheid system that persecutes the Palestinian people, but also it sheds light on the essence of the Palestinian cause and the conditions needed for accomplishing peace.
The report met with immediate condemnation from Israel and the United States. UN spokesperson Stefan Duracek told reporters in New York the report was published without any prior consultation with the UN Secretariat.
If we just saw the report today, which, as you say, was published by ESQA, it was done so without any prior consultations with the Secretariat, and the report as it stands does not reflect the views of the Secretary General.
To talk more about the report, we go not to The Hague, but to Edinburgh, Scotland, to talk to Richard Falk, co-author of the report that's titled Israeli Practices Towards the Palestinian People and the Question of Apartheid. He's written a number of books, including Palestine, The Legitimacy of Hope, Professor Emeritus of International Law at Princeton University. He previously served as the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian human rights. Professor Falk, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about the main findings of your report and how unusual this report is within the United Nations?
Yes. As the head of the Commission indicated, this is the first time that a comprehensive and systematic inquiry has been carried out into the allegation that Israel is responsible for maintaining an apartheid regime in relation to the Palestinian people. One of the distinctive features of the report is to treat the Palestinians as a whole, and that's quite innovative as far as the discussions of the applicability of apartheid to the Palestinian circumstances is concerned. And that means distinguishing between Palestinians that live under occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, or as permanent residents in Jerusalem, or as a Palestinian minority in the State of Israel, and finally as refugees or involuntary exiles. What the report argues is that Israel has pursued a policy of fragmenting the Palestinian people in order to maintain the domination of a Jewish state over these different categories of Palestinians, and has done so in a way that is systematically discriminatory and is responsible for deep suffering over a very long period of time with no end in sight. Unlike other forms of international criminality, this is an ongoing crime, according to the analysis in the report, and there is no end in sight, nor no political process that can adequately challenge this set of policies and structures that have been applied to the Palestinian people.
Well, Professor Falk, I'd like you to say something about the agency that commissioned and published the report, the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. The membership of this agency, there are 18 Arab members, a number of whom don't recognize Israel. So do you think that that might raise questions about the legitimacy of the report?
Well, these Arab members of ESQA did was to ask that such a report be prepared. And Virginia Tilley, professor at the University of Southern Illinois, and myself were asked to prepare this report on a contract basis. It doesn't represent a UN finding as such. It is a report commissioned by the UN that has been received with approval, but there's been no formal endorsement of it. It's possible that it will be endorsed, or efforts will be made to obtain an endorsement at the General Assembly or in other parts of the UN system. But as of now, it's a scholarly report undertaken by independent scholars, and there is a kind of disclaimer that the UN, this UN commission made, that the report doesn't necessarily represent even ESQA's views. It is the views of the two of us who prepared the report.
So Israel's UN ambassador, Danny Danon, issued a statement saying, quote, "The attempt to smear and falsely label the only true democracy in the Middle East by creating a false analogy is despicable and constitutes a blatant lie." The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, the former South Carolina governor, Nikki Haley, said the U.S. is outraged by the report. In a written statement, she said, quote, "that such anti-Israel propaganda would come from a body whose membership nearly universally does not recognize Israel is unsurprising, that it was drafted by Richard Falk, a man who has repeatedly made biased and deeply offensive comments about Israel and espoused ridiculous conspiracy theories, including about the 9/11 terrorist attacks, is equally unsurprising." Can you respond to this? She said that the UN should withdraw the report altogether.
Well, this is, of course, nothing new in terms of the way in which Israel and the United States respond to any kind of criticism, no matter how well grounded in fact and careful, reasoned analysis. I would ask that people look at the report, look at the evidence, and then come to a conclusion. Whatever else it isn't an effort to smear Israel or to in any way give aid and comfort to anti-Semitism. In fact, the report makes a clear statement that the authors are unconditionally opposed to anti-Semitism as a form of racism, and it tries to draw a distinction between criticizing Israel as a state or Zionism as a movement from any kind of hostility to the Jewish people. But unfortunately, American diplomacy, including under the during the Obama period of leadership, and Israel don't want to deal with the substantive issues that are raised. So talk about those
substantive issues that you raised in this report, Professor Falk.
Well, the essence of the substantive issues are policies and practices that impose a discriminatory pattern of behavior that has greatly contributed to Palestinian suffering over the years on a daily basis. It is a situation that appalls most of the governments in the world and is not something that is in any way dealt with in this report in an emotional way. It looks at the policies and practices, it looks at the structures by which Israel has justified the way in which it addresses the Palestinian presence in these 4 domains, and generally tries to make an objective appraisal of how these policies and practices stand up against the international definition of apartheid that is in the 1973 International Convention on the suppression and we concluded that there is an integrated regime of apartheid that is victimizing the Palestinian people in a collective manner, and that it should be acted upon by the United Nations and by other institutional mechanisms to bring this crime to an end.
Well, Professor Falk, very quickly, before we conclude, can you say what do you expect to happen? What's the effect of this report, given that the UN has already distanced itself from it?
We have 10 seconds.
The Secretariat has distanced itself. Other organs of the UN haven't responded, so far as I know. Our hope is that this report will lead to a careful inquiry by appropriate organs of the UN, and that if our analysis is persuasive, that it will have some political consequences.
Richard Falk, we want to thank you for being with us, joining us from Edinburgh, Scotland, co-author of the report, Israeli Practices Towards the Palestinian People and the Question of Apartheid. Thanks for joining us.